Putin has kept most of Russia in the dark.
You say, Dad, they're bombing us. And he says, no, no,
Yes.
no, that's not what's happening.
No, 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 no. Everything, yeah. So he just cannot believe in this reality. So they exist in another reality, and there are no free medias in Russia. They got the information that the tree behind them is red, and then I called him and said, "No, Father, the tree is green." He just cannot believe. He wants to believe me, but he cannot.
People like me are the people who have disappeared from these shows over the past few weeks. So 3 weeks ago, I could have gone on and said exactly what Karen said, and I would have been yelled at for it, but I would have been able to say it. The fact that it's a big deal that someone is able to say it for 30 seconds on Russian TV now shows just how much things have changed. They are really nervous about controlling this message, and so they are really clamping down on anybody saying anything that doesn't fit the party line.
Yeah, that's right. We've had a message from the Prosecutor General's office here, apparently requesting a court to declare Facebook an extremist organisation. Now, that would equate it to things like ISIS, and it means that a full blocking of this website. And if people do get round it and use VPNs to access it, they could be vulnerable to charges of extremism. 2 weeks in, over 330 multinational companies have paused operations here. The effects are already very visible. Take a look. This is the biggest mall in St. Petersburg. Stores shuttered as sanctions bite. McDonald's is due to close its stores Monday, and there have already been big lines at other Western outlets. People here rushing to make one last purchase. Putin's also warned Russia could seize the assets of firms who are leaving Russia and transfer them to others who are willing to work with the country. That would be a dramatic move, of course, but unlikely, I think, to generate the kind of income this country is now losing.
I know I get a lot of comments that say, go Russia, go Putin. You know, after the whole, after we saw how Ukrainians were treating black and brown people.
And when it was time to get on this bus, the Ukrainians said, just Ukrainians, literally as a black person. I even lied that I was pregnant. They didn't care. I was begging. The official literally looked me in my eye and said in his language, only Ukrainians, that's all. That if you are black, you should walk. And that was an additional 8 hours from where we were.
And for me, it's always the people in my comment section that are like, why do you always have to make it about race? Why do you always have to talk about race? Why are you always talking about race? And it's so funny because how uncomfortable you feel this moment, you know, that I'm discussing race, I promise you, it's not nearly as uncomfortable as how people feel when they're being attacked, marginalized by racists. I promise you. So you can bear this, okay? A lot of people are just super pissed and they're supporting Russia. But be careful. Be very careful what you're supporting.
Protesters who risk 15 years in jail for just speaking out. No to war, he heard shouted. According to human rights monitoring groups, by late afternoon, nearly 4,000 people had already been detained in 53 cities across the length and breadth of Russia in connection with their invasion of Ukraine.
At the end of the day, democracy represents freedom. When it comes to the way the world is going, when we think about China, when we think about Russia, when we think about the West, right? These powers, whose side am I on? I'm gonna choose freedom. I'm gonna choose democracy. So, and you can hear from my accent, I'm gonna choose America, all the way, right? Because at the very least, even though democracy is flawed, because it favors white supremacy, even though it's flawed, it still allows freedom, freedom of speech, freedom for me to get on here and ridicule white supremacists, freedom for me to speak and say what I want. And that's not the case in Russia, and it's not the case in China. And guess what? You're still going to face white supremacy in Russia. You're still going to face racial supremacy in China. All these superpowers have one thing in common, and that's racial superiority. They believe that their race is and should be the dominant and superior race in the world. There's so many examples of this.
Well, the true nature of the Communist Party is to rule China, but also rule the rest of the world. It is a totalitarian organization, and now it's promoting this idea of Tianxia, or all under heaven. For 2,000 years, China's emperors believed that they had the mandate of heaven to rule the entire world. And they believed that other societies had an obligation to acknowledge Chinese sovereignty. Well, that's exactly what Xi Jinping, the current ruler right now, is actually promoting. He's been doing this in the imagery that he's been using, going back to, for instance, the 2008 Summer Olympics. We're talking about one world. Well, that sounds nice, but when Chinese emperors talk about one world, they mean that they rule one world.
The Chinese, not only do they think their race is superior, they think their religion is superior. Let's look at what China has done to the Muslims in China, right? When we think about Russia, if you think what has happened to black people in Ukraine would not happen in Russia, think again. Think again. Because essentially they are the same people, they are kin. And then when it comes to the West, we all know the stories of white supremacy and how that was built and structured. And even in the Middle East, you're still going to see racism towards black people. I mean, not even just the Middle East. I was in Bangladesh. Well, luckily I traveled with an Arab, so they let me go and I had an American passport. But my sister, who flew in from Nigeria, even though she had a British passport, they made her stay in the airport for hours. I don't remember, it was a ridiculous number of hours. And then the other one, even longer. So when we think racism is not an issue, when we think racism is a global issue, and it's not just black and white. You know, it's brown on brown, it's colorism, it's tribalism, it's ethnic divisions. That's how racism is in the world. And it sucks. And that's a battle that we as a society have to tackle and combat, right? But when it comes to democracy versus communism, even though they're trying to disguise communism as something else, you know, call it an authoritarian government, whatever they're calling it, it is communism. And when it comes down to communism versus democracy, I'm on the side of democracy. I'm on the side of freedom, because at least democracy offers the ability to combat racial or racism. It gives you the freedom of speech to speak your mind. So when we look at what Russians are doing to Russian people, when we look at what the Chinese are doing to the Chinese people, what do you think they would do to people that are not their race when they do that to their own race? And if we allow NATO be defeated by Russia and China, what will they do to the world? Would you say that communism is evil?
You know, you can use evil, you could use malign, whatever term you want, but we have seen since the beginning of the 20th century that communism, in fact, has resulted in tens of millions of deaths in those countries where there's been a communist system. So clearly Stalin's purges. You know, talking about China, under Mao Zedong, the first ruler of the People's Republic of China, the death toll from the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, and other misadventures is in the tens of millions. You know, scholars will debate whether it's 30 million or whether it's 70 million, but the death toll has been horrific.
What is going to happen when China comes after all these African nations that have taken up so many loans?
Well, China's aid, as we've witnessed with the Belt and Road Initiative, has really been to make countries dependent, to force them into debt traps, then to seize property, which they did in Sri Lanka at the Hambantota port. So it's a very different vision of the world. Countries, by and large, except for, let's say, Iran and North Korea, don't buy into China's vision of the world.
You see, when African nations take up loans from European countries, even though even though those loans should be null and void because Europe got rich off of Africa. That's a whole other conversation. At the end of the day, the Europeans are not going to come and seize our ports. They've done that historically. They've abused historically. They've done so many things historically. But they're not going to come and seize our ports. They're not going to come and do things. There are checks and balances. There is international law. There are things that they cannot get away with. And the court of public opinion will stop them from doing it. But if China is the superpower in the world, if China is the dominant force in the world, what happens when the Chinese decide that they want to seize, they want all their loans back? Because we know at the end of the day, all these loans that these African nations are taking, it's just these greedy politicians that take these loans and steal the money and don't intend to build their countries. And what happens? You end up creating debt in the country, passing on debt. So after all, China's going to come for their money. And what happens? Because the person that took the loan didn't use it to build the country. They stole the money. So what happens then? I'm not on the side of the white supremacists. I'm on the side of freedom. I'm on the side of NATO. I'm on the side of democracy. I'm on the side that at the very least gives you the ability to even correct itself. Not Russia that doesn't even allow its people know what's actually going on, that tries to control the communication to the extent that the Russian people do not believe that this is really happening right now. They don't believe that Ukraine is happening.
So after I finished this discussion, I made a post in Instagram that my father does not believe me. And there was more than 135,000 shares of this post. So I realized that the problem is super widespread. There was like thousands and thousands of comments, and all the people wrote that I have the same thing. My mother does not believe me. My sister doesn't believe me.
And this reminds me of how the Nigerian government, on October 20th, 2020, the Nigerian military shot unarmed protesters, the Lekki massacre, and shot people across the country, then proceeded to deny and call it fake news. This is what Russia's doing. They're calling it fake news. So if we do not allow democracy to prevail, if we do not allow freedom of speech to prevail, that will attack all of us. So some people believe that Ukraine means supporting freedom. I don't believe that. I don't believe that Ukraine means supporting freedom. You know, some people believe that. So they're going to fight for Ukraine because of that. I believe that NATO must prevail, must be as strong as possible. And that's what I believe. That's what freedom is to me, right? I don't think Ukraine is it. I think Ukraine, I understand where Putin is coming from.
In this sense, we have made it clear that any further NATO movement to the east is unacceptable. There is nothing unclear about this. We are not deploying our missiles over at the borders of the US. No. On the other hand, the US is deploying its missiles close to our home, on the porch of our house.
Ukraine was formerly Russian territory. Now that's between them to fight over. That's between them to squabble over. I don't think it's anyone's business. And if the West wants to get involved now, why didn't you get involved before when Russia was taking up all these other territories? Why didn't you get involved? Why are you only getting involved now? So what is the conclusion here? I mean, everybody decide what you fight for. I stand for freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of information, and freedom does not come without favoritism, right? It's like Animal Farm, right? What's the quote in Animal Farm? Some people are equal, but others are more equal. And that's what we see in democracy. That's what we see. Some people are equal, but others are more equal. And democracy is closely linked to capitalism. And some people believe capitalism is a form of slavery, right? Some people believe that. Some people do not stand for capitalism. Capitalism is how white supremacy was built, right? They're built together, right? So And that's the fuel that runs democracy, right? So it is flawed, but that doesn't mean that we can't go back in and fix the engine, because the principle of democracy is about freedom, and I'm gonna fight for that, always. Because it's the best option, as opposed to what China is offering and what Russia is offering. I'm gonna choose freedom, I'm gonna choose freedom. So it's for those of us that have inherited democracy to fix it, because it can be fixed. There is an option. It can be fixed. And I see a lot of willingness to change the system, right? But at the same time, we must defend democracy. We must defend freedom, right? We must defend these things because it's so important. I just can't even imagine living without that. I can't imagine having Russia or China be bigger superpowers and then deciding they're going to take freedom from everyone else in the world. As they say, a threat to one democracy is a threat to all democracies. But either way, I'm on the side of democracy and freedom. And when it comes to the matters of capitalism, when it comes to the matters of white supremacy, I think it's for us within democracies to fix it, to mount on that pressure to make it change. And I really believe that it starts with Africa as a continent being united. So that starts with each African country uniting. There have been so many coups this year, but there have been so many coups breaking out, so many wars going on right now in Africa. We're not united. And so there needs to be unity, because even though we see ourselves as different, and we are ethnically different, we have similar ethnicities to people in Europe than we do with ourselves, because that's how biologically diverse Africans are. But we must unite if we really want to grow. If we want to grow, we have to unite. And it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very difficult, near impossible. But you see what the West, how they've band together to support Ukraine. We need to be able to do that, starting off in our own countries, right? Think about Nigeria. We're so divided even within Nigeria. Right now the north of Nigeria is on fire, but people in the south, they don't care. That's not their problem. So we have to be united as countries in Africa first. Then we have to be united. We have to be Pan-African. Once we fix that, it sounds near impossible, but once we fix that, we automatically become a global superpower. That's 1 billion people united. That's as powerful as India. That's as powerful as China even. But think about all the resources that we have on the continent, which gives us the ability to have even more power. But that mentality is just difficult to circulate in Africa. And that's what prevented Africa in the beginning from growing. And that's what's preventing it right now. So that's the focus. We have to be united, and then we have to fight white supremacy. And I include all the diaspora, all the Black diaspora. We all need to unite. We have to unite. Stop seeing ourselves as different. Stop only caring about our races. We have to unite, come together. And that's the only way we're ever going to fight white supremacy. But as it stands, when it comes to democracy, I'm on the side of democracy. I'm on the side of freedom. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. Leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, all the above. My name is Kenim, and see you next time. Peace.